Welcome to Leeds Industrial Museum.
Hello, I'm Chris Sharp. I'm the keeper at Leeds Industrial Museum and at Thwaite Watermill, which means I manage two historic museums in Leeds.
Sitting astride the River Aire near Kirkstall, Leeds Industrial Museum is housed within the converted Armley Mills. Once the largest woolen mill in the world, Armley Mills eventually succumbed to advances in technology and changing economic climates and was forced to close its doors in 1971. It reopened in 1982 as Leeds Industrial Museum, housing a wide variety of industrial collections, from textile machinery to heavy engineering. Its story echoes the one told within its walls, that of a society transitioning from heavy to creative industries. Song the Future is an avatar-led interactive performance that tells the story of Lu and her family through the shifting industrial climate of Shanghai. It was available at Leeds Industrial Museum during October 2022.
It was brilliant to have the Song the Future augmented reality experience at Leeds Industrial Museum at Armley Mills, and it was great to work with partners at the university, digital partners, SMEs and all the funders to make the experience wonderful for our visitors.
By telling the story of evolving industries from a Chinese perspective, it invites the viewer to reflect on the commonalities of UK-China's shared cultural heritage.
It's also made me aware of the commonality between those industrial stories in China and in the UK. They happen on a different timescale. So industrialisation of the textile industries in the UK happened a long time before it happened in China. But those stories are actually quite similar, about moving from a cottage industry into an industrial setting and then looking for a move away from manufacturing into creative industries. So I can see, there's a real common thread between the experiences in the UK and the experiences in Shanghai, and this project's taught me a lot about that.
On paper, you would think that a Chinese woman's experience in the 20th century would not have much to do with Armley Mills in like the 19th century and often male, but not not completely, or my experience, frankly, in the 21st century, such as it is. But yeah, I thought it was interesting how many sort of parallels, but I mean, I guess maybe a textile factory is a textile factory. Automation, creating space for leisure as well. Kind of if Lu had been working in a village trying to hand loom textiles or whatever, that's it, that's your life, right? But there's space for not Peking opera, obviously, because it wasn't in Peking, but the opera songs and for leisure and for opportunities to try and do other things. And the same, I guess, maybe the start of the idea of leisure as a thing in the 1800s.
It was the massive impact on women, and the women were doing the work. And I think, as I said to you, thinking about how in Saltaire and Shipley, it'd been my grandma doing the work in the mills when she was 14 as a burler and mender. So it was thinking, actually there are all these women in China working away, presumably in the same pretty poor conditions, and the impact on their health and their futures, really. So that was one of the things.
Of course, the stories of our two cultures are far from identical, and there were many differences in our history too. The social welfare of the textile workers was very different between the two countries.
Under Mao, there was a systematic welfare system introduced: free medical care, free child care, free housing, and so on and so forth. So overall, I would say the mill condition under Mao's era was drastically improved, and that condition, that so-called good welfare condition, lasted until the late 1980s, early 1990s.
The prospects of the redundant mill workers in the UK and China were also very different.
Working the mills, I think it was sometimes harder afterwards because there wasn't the amount of paid work. However badly it was paid, however hard the work was, it's like people were having to be more creative about what they did and how they got money.
Knowing what I know from working here, that it was a very different kind of story compared to here. It was very much the Lu story is all about like a positive change, and how a little bit like a bittersweet, I guess. It was sad, but actually something really great came out of it, and I think it does juxtapose a little bit with what happened here, whereby the industry's just sort of ended, but not because they wanted to transition to like a new industry. It just ended because all of a sudden it was cheaper to manufacture everything elsewhere.
In China, intangible cultural heritage such as Yue opera continued to grow and evolve in the wake of the mill closures, whilst in the UK it was largely lost.
Those textile workers brought their hometown music from rural countryside to urban cities in Shanghai and developed it as a modern musical theatre. But under Mao's era, there was a huge funding went into developing institutions as well as the music training the artists and imported a lot of artists, and they were all national famous directors, script writers, musicians, and so on and so forth. And those promotion and funding fundamentally changed this regional performance to become the second largest, the so-called opera form in today's China. And that is the background of our project, Song of the Female Textile Workers, or Song of the Future.
But today, the creative industries continue to grow in both the UK and China.
The commonality between UK and China is the recycle and reuse of the old industrial sites, in this case textile industry, textile factories or textile mills. And in Shanghai we have M50, the so-called Contemporary Creative Park, and in the UK an Harmony Mill, which is in essence an educational and cultural site. But across both countries and under the terminology of creative industries, we're trying to find a way to creatively use the heritage sites as well as the heritage, intangible cultural heritage, such as music, songs, to revive our identity and branding for the city to attract tourists to our sites. So that's supposed to be the essence of creative industries.
I will leave you with one particular tale from the Yorkshire Mills.
I did meet a lady who actually used to work in the mills in Bradford. And I'm trying to think where I met her actually. Gran Canaria? No. I think it was Sri Lanka I met her, and she used to work in the mills. And I'll be perfectly honest, and I mean, she was then in her 70s, it was a few years ago. And she actually married somebody in order to get out of that situation. And she ended up being a very well-travelled lady who actually who'd got vision, knew where she wanted to go. But she started in the mills. He was, at that point, a college lecturer. And he ended up lecturing in Kenya, Malta. She had a marvellous life. She had 5 children. She had people working for her, cleaning and doing whatnot. And she had quite a charmed existence. And she wasn't shy about saying what she'd done and her motives for marrying him either.